competing on price and focusing on it solely will be one of the biggest detriments that you could possibly make. Just because you're buying material for a certain price, your labor costs another price, you've built a schedule for a certain period of time, doesn't mean that your competitors can do it for the same material price or higher or lower. So it's critical to focus on performance and your ability to perform versus your price. And most importantly, inside your business, it's most critical for you to know what it takes for you to perform your best, what pricing, what margin, and what terms you need inside your business, and then bid to those terms. I'm gonna give you a 5-step process now, in general summary of ways you can figure out what your real and hard costs are, and at least give you a guide to be able to start to assess that inside your business. If you have 4 or 5 projects all starting at once and you're only used to doing 2 projects at one time, you can have perfect margin, perfect profit in each one of those, but it's gonna be really hard to cash flow 5 jobs when you're used to only cash flowing 2. What they didn't realize is the float of that extra 35 or 40 days between having to pay that one supplier in 45 days and the other one in 70 days, 75 days, it actually cost them not only 8%, but it ate that margin up. By the time they had the 2 purchases, it ate up the entire margin and actually created way too much cash that they needed. Use a cash flow tool. Get some access to some information for yourself. You don't have to try to wing it. You don't have to come up with something fancy. There's plenty of cash flow tools out there. Welcome everybody to the next episode of the Construction MF'ers Podcast. I am Scott Peper, CEO and founder of Mobilization Funding, and today we're going to talk about price. If you're in the construction world, in this business, fighting the good fight, looking to make a great profit, take care of your family, do great work, perform over and over again, this video is going to be exactly for you. Because competing on price and focusing on it solely will be one of the biggest detriments that you could possibly make. Now, for those of you in the government contracting world and it's a low bid environment, this video might not be the best solution for you. It might not fit every mold, but I promise you the parts I'm going to talk about, especially as it relates to performance and especially as it relates to a reasonable price, you're probably going to win it. You're probably still going to win just like the private folks. So let's get into it. So what is the biggest problem with competing on price? Well, let's talk a little bit about comparison. If you're going to compete on price in your market, you're obviously and naturally being compared to other people's prices. And that top price that you offer to do the job at is probably what the market might dictate in a certain competitive environment. But what it doesn't take into consideration is what are your costs to compete at that price compared to your competitors' costs to compete at that price. Just because you're buying material for a certain price, your labor costs another price, you've built a schedule for a certain period of time, doesn't mean that your competitors can do it for the same material price or higher or lower, the same labor price higher or lower, and it certainly doesn't mean that they can't have better efficiency in their schedule or some other way of generating more profit from the same exact top line price. And so that comparison factor, if you're not comparing every variable, including the expenses and the top line price, it's impossible for you to judge yourself. Now, what you can do is know your costs inside and out. Know what it takes for you to perform inside and out. And what I'm going to try to tell you guys today, and I want you to take this message home with you. Competing on price, you can win, but you can also lose on price. If you compete on performance and your capability and the way you make customers feel and the way that their job will execute when you're on it, then it's very difficult for people to come over there and execute, make your customer feel the same way and do all the same things. What it will do is it will start to open up transparency to you on the pricing that you're offered. Now remember, if you're a subcontractor doing a certain scope of work, the price the general contractor has bid, is typically fixed. They might be working off a fixed bid. And certainly they've budgeted a certain component for your subcontract. But in all the different trades, they're going to be buying jobs out a little higher on some trades, a little lower on others. Depending on the trade you're in, I can tell you right now, some trades, you can't afford to have them fail. And if you're in one of those trades where it's very difficult for the project to succeed if you fail, you're even more urged, and I'm even urging you more to focus on performance first, because your ability to perform is going to carry the project for your customer. And your ability to perform, if you lead with that, is even more critical. And so by showing your customer what you need to perform, which includes your price, it includes your terms. And when I say price, you have got to make margin. You need to make a fair margin, but you need to make enough money that will not only cash flow your project net of retainage, okay, net of retainage, you still have to cash flow your project. You have to make sure that you can actually execute to that, which means keeping you sane, keeping your employees whole, being able to pay all your bills, managing your sub-suppliers and vendors relationships. And the only way to do that is to have cash coming off the job. And the only way to do that is to be able to retain profit coming off the job so you can move on to the next job. Or you'll never be able to grow with that customer anyway. And they all want you to be able to perform and move on with them from project to project. So it's critical to focus on performance and your ability to perform versus your price. And most importantly, inside your business, it's most critical for you to know what it takes for you to perform your best, what pricing, what margin, and what terms you need inside your business, and then bid to those terms. And if you are not winning enough jobs, first, bid more. And second, look and start challenging yourself at what you might be doing unrealistically so that you can make some modifications. But even so, it's critical for you to start with, what does it take for you to succeed well? What does it take? You might actually need things that other companies don't need, and that's okay. Certain environments, they're not going to give all the work to everybody. You've got to be able to show you can perform, and as you build that performance history, you're going to also build that history of being able to knock out jobs, and you're going to earn more work, and you're going to earn it at a better price. I promise you, we talk to lots of general contractors. If you ask them what's the number one thing they care about when they're picking a trade partner or anyone to work on their job, they care about the ability to perform more than they care about price. They care about price after they know and feel confident that they have someone who can perform. A big part of what I just went through was knowing what your costs are. So we're going to spend a little time and focus on that. I'm going to give you a 5-step process now in general summary of ways you can figure out what your real and hard costs are and at least give you a guide to be able to start to assess that inside your business. So step number 1, you want to review your current project balances. What does that mean? That's your WIP report. You want to know what projects you have on the table, when they're going to start, what costs you have in each one of them, and how much cash are you going to need to execute each one of those. Knowing that will help be a great basis for where you are health-wise inside your business and your ability to perform. If you have 4 or 5 projects all starting at once and you're only used to doing 2 projects at one time, you can have perfect margin, perfect profit in each one of those, but it's going to be really hard to cash flow 5 jobs when you're used to only cash flowing 2. And where that extra cash is going to come from, where the extra labor is going to come from. Do you start doing some jobs with subcontract labor versus direct, different material vendors versus others? Those are the things you're going to need to start to figure out. Number 2, identify your available cash and the upcoming expenses that are associated to the uses of that cash. Well, this is just a simple project cash flow like we've been talking about. I recommend you build it out project by project, especially if you're in the earlier years of your business. But even so, you're going to need a specific project cash flow for your accounting team, your project management team, and certainly the execution. And then on top of that, as each project rolls up, you're going to need a corporate cash flow to manage the big picture. Number 3, let's analyze your fixed and variable expenses as it relates to the business. let's talk about it. Some of that can be your overhead. Some of that can be the material vendors on jobs. If you're looking through each individual job, you can start to look and see where some of these things are going to be problematic, and you can make some adjustments. Number 4, let's calculate your necessary margins. What do you actually need to make on each job in order for the job to cash flow, and in order for you to retain the profit you're going to have afterwards? Some of the greatest projects I've seen might have a 35-40% margin, but you know what? They never cash flow. The terms are just too arduous and too strenuous. They got to pay suppliers too early in the project. Labor is at a big expense. And yes, they have a ton of margin in it and they're going to bill these dollars, but it takes 60 or 75 days to get paid. And all of a sudden, you have a project that never cash flows, which means you're investing 100% of the actual cost of the project into it without being paid enough money to recoup that. That's okay to do. And you know what? When you have a strong balance sheet and lots of access to credit or just a ton of cash, there's no problem with that because you can invest those dollars for what would be a big 40% return, right? But if you don't have enough cash and you don't have enough cash to execute and leave that money into the project for that long period of time until you're 100% paid, it's going to be really hard to put 100% of cost in before you cash flow. And that's why it's so critical to understand. Number 5, use a cash flow tool. It could be your own. It could be your accountant's. You can use the one we have on our website for free. But use a cash flow tool that will allow you to see what your actual project cash flows are based on your bid and based on the schedule you're trying to keep to execute the work. This is a simple tool that you can use just right off of your bid sheet. Knowing the things you already know in your head, your project managers, your estimators, your business owners, leaders, they can all use this cash flow tool as a critical component to know what amount of cash you're going to need from start to finish on the job. It's amazingly powerful when you have that information in front of you before you ever start, and it's exactly how you avoid that scenario where you're out in the middle of a job and it's going perfectly smooth and you're starting to run out of money. And you say to yourself, if I could just get paid for what I've billed right now, I'd be fine. That exact scenario is a cash flow scenario. And you're right, if you could be just paid, you would be fine. The problem is you can't just be paid because they haven't been paid yet, or the money isn't flowing off the job, or the terms of your suppliers and vendors are going to start biting on you and you have to pay them, but there's not enough money coming. So you have to figure those things out in advance. And when you do, and you know them in advance by using a project cash flow tool, you'll be able to adjust and make those decisions in advance sooner. I'll give you an example. We had a client who was an electrical contractor, and they were negotiating super hard for this lighting package because it was a big component of the scope. They had good margin in there, and they were bidding that out, and there was a good margin on the actual materials themselves. So they were able to get a 8% discount by ordering through this one vendor instead of an alternative one. Same product, same information, it was no big deal. Well, the one vendor was going to give them 30 days. The other vendor was going to let them pay it in 70 because their customer, it was a government job, and their customer was paying them in 60 days, but it really stretched to about 90. They were making the assumption that the 8% savings on that huge lighting package was going to be well worth it and drop all to the bottom line. What they didn't realize is the float of that extra 35 or 40 days between having to pay that one supplier in 45 days and the other one in 70 days, 75 days, it actually cost them not only 8%, but it ate that margin up. By the time they had the two purchases, it ate up the entire margin and actually created way too much cash that they needed. If they went to borrow that money, it would have actually hurt them. So instead, by building out this cash flow, they were able to actually pivot to the original supplier who would let them pay in 75 days, pay 8% more for the material, but still make a great profit and actually cash flow the job. Those are the types of things and scenarios you'll see where you'll be able to make those decisions too. To conclude, I want to recap here for you all. We talked about the difference between bidding on price, how it can hurt you, and it can be a big detriment to the success you grow on. We talked about a better focus on performance and your ability to perform, And most importantly, know what your costs are, the terms you need, and how you can execute in order to actually perform for your business. Comparing yourself to others, although you're going to win or lose based on your competition, you have to realize that it might not be time for you to compete with that certain person yet. Maybe they're doing the work at a loss. Maybe they aren't doing it at a loss. Maybe their cost structure is just so much lower that they're able to actually effectively do that work at the same margin you are at a much higher price. You don't know. The bottom line is, though, what you can know is what your costs are and what margin you need to perform, and you should start there. If you don't win enough, bid more. If you still don't win enough, then start to look at your hard costs and what you need to execute. But most importantly, don't sacrifice your margin and don't sacrifice the margin you need in order to be able to perform. That's the most critical component. Lastly, use a cash flow tool. Get some access to some information for yourself. You don't have to try to wing it. You don't have to come up with something fancy. There's plenty of cash flow tools out there. Again, we have one on our website at mobilizationfunding.com, but any one of your construction accountants can help you build a cash flow. You can get a cash flow from a friend, family member, whatever you need. I know the ones that are out there that you can use from us will work. They'll provide you the data and information you need. They'll provide it to you at the beginning of the job when you have time to make changes and help yourself. So use that project cash flow tool. And lastly, build relationships with your customers by showing them and giving them access to the information you're using so that you can leverage these relationships to explain to them what you need to perform. And that although you might have a higher price, unfortunately, it's what you need in order to be able to execute that work. And that conversation, if they do want to give you the job and it needs to be a lower price, now it'll open the door for you to be able to gain back some of that margin if you do have to make a sacrifice. Maybe they give you better terms in return for lowering your price. Meaning maybe they can guarantee they pay you in 30 days instead of 45 or instead of paid when paid. Who knows? But it'll open the door to what you can do and execute. And at the bottom line is you want to make sure that you can execute to perform the work you've been able to do, and price and the price you charge and how much money you make and how that cash flows is a critical component to that success. So don't sacrifice it. I hope this video helped you all. If it did, please click subscribe here and check us out. In the meantime, I wish you all a great week and God bless you.